Ethan sat alone in the back seat of a rented car, staring out the window at the rolling countryside. He had left behind his penthouse suite, private jet, and constant entourage for one reason: to disappear. For years, he'd been trapped in a gilded cage of wealth and fame, suffocating under the weight of expectations. This trip was supposed to be his escape, a chance to breathe without cameras flashing or assistants hovering nearby. Dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, Ethan blended seamlessly into the rural landscape. No one here would recognize him. No one cared about billionaires or luxury brands. Or so he thought. But fate had other plans. As he stepped out of the car during a pit stop, dizziness washed over him. His vision blurred, and before he could steady himself, his knees buckled. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the dirt road beneath his feet. When Ethan came to, he found himself lying on a cot in a small, dimly lit room. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the hum of an old ceiling fan echoed above him. A young woman stood nearby, adjusting an 4-drip attached to his arm. "You're lucky we found you," she said softly, her voice calm and reassuring. "Dehydration and exhaustion. You'll be fine, but you need to rest." Ethan blinked up at her, too groggy to respond. Something about her demeanor, calm, unimpressed, felt foreign yet comforting. She didn't seem fazed by his presence, which intrigued him more than he cared to admit. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary encounter would change everything, for both of them. The young woman introduced herself as Clara. She was in her late 20s, with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that put Ethan at ease. Unlike the polished professionals he was used to dealing with, Clara seemed refreshingly real. Her scrubs slightly wrinkled, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and her hands calloused from years of hard work. Clara didn't waste time asking unnecessary questions or prying into his personal life. Instead, she focused on what mattered most: getting him stable and comfortable. "Drink this," she instructed, handing him a glass of water mixed with electrolytes. "Slowly. Your body needs it." Ethan obeyed without argument, too tired to protest. As he sipped, he studied her carefully. There was something different about her, not just her efficiency but also her lack of pretense. Most people treated him differently once they knew who he was, bending over backward to impress him. But Clara acted like he was any other patient, which both surprised and intrigued him. Over the next few hours, she checked on him regularly, ensuring his vitals were improving. Each visit was brief yet meaningful. Once, when she noticed him grimacing in discomfort, she brought him an extra blanket without being asked. Another time, she handed him a granola bar, saying simply, "You'll need the energy." What struck Ethan most was how uninterested she seemed in his appearance or demeanor. While others might have speculated about his expensive watch or designer sneakers, Clara barely glanced at them. To her, he was just another person in need of care, a rarity in his world. By evening, word had spread among the clinic staff about their mysterious visitor. One nurse whispered excitedly to another, "Isn't that Ethan Carter, the billionaire?" Soon, curious glances began darting his way, but Clara remained unfazed. When a colleague nudged her and whispered, "Do you know who that is?" Clara shrugged dismissively. "I don't really follow all that stuff," she admitted casually. "To me, he's just a patient." Her indifference spoke volumes to Ethan. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, money, influence, connections, Clara stood apart. Her focus wasn't on what he could offer but on what he needed. It was humbling and oddly liberating. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself looking forward to Clara's visits. He even caught himself smiling when she teased him gently for trying to sit up too soon. "Not so fast, Mr. Carter," she joked, using his last name only because it was written on his chart. "You're not invincible, you know." For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen, not as a millionaire or a public figure, but as a human being. And though he couldn't explain why, it made him want to stay longer than planned. Over the next few days, Ethan's health improved steadily under Clara's care. The clinic was small and understaffed, but Clara managed to keep everything running smoothly. She checked on him regularly, bringing updates on his progress and making sure he followed her instructions. "You're lucky," she told him one morning as she adjusted his four. "If you'd collapsed anywhere else around here, it might have taken hours for someone to find you." Ethan nodded, grateful for her honesty. "I guess I owe you my life," he said lightly, trying to sound casual despite the sincerity in his voice. Clara chuckled, brushing off the comment. "It's my job. Besides, anyone would have done the same." But Ethan knew better. Not everyone would have treated him with such kindness, or ignored his fame entirely. Most people would have been intimidated or overly eager to please. Clara, however, remained steadfastly herself. Practical, compassionate, and refreshingly genuine. As they spent more time together, their conversations grew longer and deeper. Clara shared stories about growing up in the countryside, helping her mother tend to sick neighbors before pursuing nursing school. "This place isn't much," she admitted, gesturing around the modest clinic. "But it's home, and I love knowing I can make a difference here." Ethan listened intently, fascinated by her perspective. Coming from a world of excess, he admired her contentment with simplicity. "You're amazing at what you do," he said sincerely. "Have you ever thought about working somewhere bigger? A hospital in the city, maybe?" Clara shook her head firmly. "Cities aren't for me. Too loud, too busy. Here I know everyone who walks through that door. We're a community. That matters more than anything fancy hospitals can offer." Her words stayed with Ethan long after their conversation ended. He realized how disconnected he felt from the world, how insulated his wealth had made him. Clara, on the other hand, radiated purpose and connection. She reminded him of things he'd forgotten. The joy of serving others, the importance of belonging, the value of staying grounded. Meanwhile, the rest of the staff couldn't resist treating Ethan differently once they learned his identity. Nurses lingered unnecessarily during rounds, asking intrusive questions about his businesses or dropping hints about potential donations. One even handed him a glossy brochure for a local charity gala, clearly hoping he'd attend. Clara noticed the shift but didn't join in. If anything, she became even more protective of Ethan's privacy. When a reporter somehow tracked him down and showed up at the clinic gates, Clara intercepted them, refusing entry. "He's recovering," she said firmly. "Whatever story you're chasing will have to wait." Ethan watched the exchange from his window, deeply moved by her loyalty. No one had ever shielded him from prying eyes before, not without expecting something in return. Clara's actions reinforced his growing admiration for her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan found himself opening up to Clara in ways he hadn't with anyone else. "Do you ever feel like, no matter how hard you try, people only see what you can give them?" he asked hesitantly. Clara tilted her head, studying him thoughtfully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remind myself that their opinions don't define me. What matters is how I see myself, and whether I'm staying true to who I am." Her response struck a chord deep within him. For years, Ethan had let others dictate his worth based on his bank account or achievements. Hearing Clara speak so confidently about authenticity inspired him to rethink his priorities. Their bond deepened with each passing day. Though neither acknowledged it openly, there was an undeniable spark between them, a mutual respect and understanding that transcended their vastly different lives. By the time Ethan was well enough to leave, he realized he wasn't ready to say goodbye. Ethan's departure from the clinic was delayed when a local journalist snapped photos of him leaving the building. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, sensationalizing his collapse and speculating about his reasons for visiting such a remote area. Headlines like, "Billionaire breaks down in rural town," and "What was Ethan Carter doing so far from home?" flooded social media, sparking widespread curiosity. Clara first learned of the frenzy when her colleague rushed into the clinic holding a tabloid magazine. "Did you know who he really is?" the nurse asked breathlessly, pointing to Ethan's picture on the cover. Clara glanced at it briefly, then shrugged. "It doesn't change anything," she replied calmly. But deep down, Clara couldn't ignore the nagging doubts creeping into her mind. She had treated Ethan as just another patient, someone in need of care, but now the world saw him as a billionaire icon. What if he viewed her differently too? Had their connection been real, or merely a fleeting moment made possible by his anonymity? For Ethan, the sudden attention brought back all the frustrations he'd tried to escape. Reporters camped outside the clinic, eager for interviews or glimpses of him. Fans gathered nearby, hoping for autographs. Even distant relatives reached out, asking how they could help. Through it all, Clara remained steadfastly professional. She continued treating Ethan with the same kindness and respect, refusing to let his fame alter her behavior. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that things between them were shifting. One afternoon, as Ethan prepared to leave, Clara entered his room carrying discharge papers. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. "You're free to go whenever you're ready," she said softly, placing the documents on the bedside table. Ethan looked up at her, sensing the distance growing between them. "Clara," he began, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't want this to end here." She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. "Ethan, I'm just a small-town nurse. You live in a completely different world. People will always wonder why someone like you would care about someone like me." Her words stung, not because they were harsh but because they echoed his own fears. He knew what others would say, that he was slumming it, indulging in some romanticized notion of rural life before returning to his luxurious reality. But Clara wasn't a phase or a distraction. She was the realest thing he'd encountered in years. "I don't care what anyone thinks," Ethan insisted, stepping closer. "What we have, it's not about where I come from or what I own. It's about us. About how you make me feel like myself again." Clara searched his face, trying to gauge his sincerity. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part feared getting hurt. "And what happens when the cameras follow you home? When your friends laugh behind your back? This isn't fair to either of us, Ethan." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted outside. A group of reporters had breached the clinic gates, shouting questions and snapping photos. Clara instinctively stepped forward, shielding Ethan from view. "Get out of here," she yelled, her protective instincts kicking in. The intrusion reinforced Clara's worst fears. Ethan's world was chaotic and invasive, a far cry from the quiet simplicity she cherished. How could they possibly bridge the gap between their lives? That night, Ethan sat alone in his rented car, staring at the darkened clinic windows. He realized he couldn't force Clara to trust him. Not yet. Winning her heart wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to try. For the first time in years, something mattered more to him than money or status, proving to Clara that their connection was worth fighting for. In the weeks following his departure, Ethan found himself unable to stop thinking about Clara. Back in the city, surrounded by luxury and convenience, he felt more disconnected than ever. The noise of traffic, the buzz of phone notifications, and the hollow smiles of acquaintances only deepened his longing for the simplicity and authenticity he'd experienced with her. Determined to prove his sincerity, Ethan made a bold decision. He returned to the rural town, not as a billionaire seeking attention, but as a man willing to earn Clara's trust. He rented a modest cabin on the outskirts of town and began volunteering at the clinic where they'd first met. At first, Clara was skeptical. "What are you doing here?" she asked bluntly when he showed up one morning wearing scrubs 2 sizes too big. "I told you," Ethan replied earnestly, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm not leaving until you believe me." Clara crossed her arms, studying him carefully. "You think showing up here is going to fix everything? This isn't some project you can buy your way out of, Ethan." "I know that," he said softly, "and I'm not trying to fix anything. I just want to be part of your world, to understand what matters to you, and maybe show you that I'm serious about us." His words lingered in the air, breaking through her defenses. Though she still harbored doubts, Clara couldn't deny the effort he was making. Over time, she allowed herself to see glimpses of the man behind the fame, the one who stayed late to help organize supplies, who listened intently to patients' concerns, and who laughed freely while sharing meals with the staff. Their bond slowly began to mend, built on shared experiences rather than grand gestures. One evening, after a long day at the clinic, Clara invited Ethan to join her for dinner at her family's farmhouse. It was a small but significant step, a sign that she was opening up to the possibility of trusting him again. Sitting around the weathered wooden table, Ethan marveled at how different this life felt from his own. Clara's mother served homemade stew. Her father cracked jokes about city folk, and her younger siblings teased her mercilessly. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he belonged somewhere, not because of his wealth or status, but because of who he was. As weeks turned into months, their relationship grew stronger. Clara began confiding in Ethan about her dreams of expanding healthcare access in underserved areas, sharing ideas for mobile clinics and telemedicine programs. Inspired by her vision, Ethan offered to fund a pilot project, emphasizing that it would be a partnership rather than charity. "This isn't about me swooping in to save the day," he explained. "It's about supporting something you've already built, a legacy rooted in care and compassion." Clara hesitated at first, wary of accepting help tied to his wealth. But seeing the genuine pride in his eyes convinced her to take the leap. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring the project to life, navigating challenges and celebrating victories along the way. Through their collaboration, both learned valuable lessons about compromise and vulnerability. Ethan discovered the joy of giving without strings attached, while Clara realized that love didn't have to mean sacrificing her independence. They were equals, two people committed to building a future grounded in mutual respect and shared values. The launch of the mobile clinic marked a turning point, not just for Clara and Ethan's relationship but also for the entire community. On the day of its inauguration, villagers gathered to celebrate, their faces lighting up with gratitude as they toured the state-of-the-art facility. For many, it was more than just access to healthcare. It was proof that someone cared enough to make a difference. Clara stood beside Ethan, watching the crowd cheer and clap. "This wouldn't have been possible without you," she admitted quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "It wouldn't have happened without you," Ethan countered, his eyes soft with admiration. "You're the heart of this project, the one who inspired me to use my resources for something meaningful." Their shared accomplishment deepened their connection, cementing the bond they'd worked so hard to build. Clara no longer feared being overshadowed by Ethan's wealth or fame because she saw how much he valued her for who she truly was. And Ethan finally understood what it meant to love selflessly, to put someone else's happiness above all else. As months passed, their lives intertwined further. Ethan divided his time between the city and the countryside, ensuring he remained present in both worlds. He continued funding initiatives to improve rural healthcare while learning to embrace the slower pace of life Clara cherished. Meanwhile, Clara stepped into new roles, advocating for underserved populations and mentoring young nurses eager to follow in her footsteps. Their differences, once sources of tension, became strengths. Clara taught Ethan the importance of humility and resilience, while Ethan showed Clara the power of dreaming big and taking risks. Together, they proved that love could transcend status and circumstance if two people were willing to meet each other halfway. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Clara's farmhouse, Ethan turned to her with a question he'd been holding onto for weeks. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" he asked softly. "Not forever, but maybe exploring the world together?" Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I've spent my whole life here, Ethan, but I think it's time I stepped outside my comfort zone. For us." Her answer filled him with hope. Their journey wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real, rooted in trust, respect, and an unshakable belief in each other. In the end, Clara and Ethan's story became a testament to the transformative power of love. They showed that true connections aren't defined by wealth, titles, or appearances, but by the willingness to see and accept someone for who they are. By choosing authenticity over artifice, they inspired those around them to do the same. And as they walked hand in hand toward an uncertain but hopeful future, they knew one thing for sure. No matter where life took them, they would face it together.